Welcome to the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks Alligator Hunting Training Course. If you are a permitted hunter or someone that's going to be traveling with one of the permitted alligator hunters, we promise this course will be very helpful to you. It's a very comprehensive course. It's going to cover everything from history of alligators, basic biology, to all the things you need to know regulation-wise, capture methods, how to actually process your alligator. We'll go through information about how to tag and report your harvest, and then we'll actually have a section on boating safety. But first and foremost, we congratulate you if you've been drawn for one of these unique permits and this unique opportunity to hunt alligators in the state of Mississippi. So the course is going to be set up in segments by topic, and hope that you'll navigate through the alligator hunting training course and the many useful links there, as well as videos. And we'll get started here as we get going. And we'll start out with some information about the history of alligators. We know from fossil records that there has been a relative or thereabouts of the American alligator for millions of years. There are a number of crocodilian species across the world. There are only two species of alligator in the world, one being the American alligator, and then its smaller cousin, the Chinese alligator, of course, found in China. But there are prehistoric records of some crocodilians, and we know that they've been in existence for a very long time. And many people regard crocodiles and alligators as the last of the remaining living prehistoric animals, and I think that's a very accurate depiction of what the alligator is. We know from records of when the early Europeans came to what is now North America, that the Native Americans that were here utilized alligators as a valuable resource. We also know a little bit more modern times from records and journals of different people who pioneered across this country that they encountered alligators. Even General Ulysses S. Grant has many notes in his journals as he came across the South. In Mississippi particularly, he made notes about crossing the Big Black River as he was going towards Vicksburg and actually navigating around the numerous moccasins and alligators that existed in the swamps. So it's something that has been in our history for a very long time. And then you get into even a little bit more modern history as you get into the late 1800s, the early 1900s, when alligators have begun to be utilized as a valuable resource in the market for their hide. There were no regulations at the time, like many wildlife species in the early 1800s and the late 1800s, early 1900s. There were no regulations to really protect wildlife species, and there were none to protect alligators. And so their value of their hide became very important, and people across the range where alligators exist were hunting them year-round and taking as many as possible to try and obtain money to be able to commercially dispose of those alligators. And then you get into the early 1930s. There was a woman by the name of Miss Fannie Cook who founded the Mississippi Game and Fish Commission back in 1938. I've gone back and looked at some of her journal writings and have produced a map that shows where alligators existed in the early 1930s. And we think that that map would probably be expanded had it been done 30, 50 years ahead of that, before alligators were being hunted to near endangered status. And in fact, alligators were put on the Endangered Species list in 1967 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This afforded the first real protection for American alligators in the United States. The value of the hide is that many people don't understand that the hide is as pliable and durable as it is. The hide can be tanned, and it is one of the most sought after animal products in the world. The hide itself can be dyed into basically any color of the rainbow with many different types of coatings on it and finishes that make it durable to be made into a number of different products. And when you think about the value of the hide, for instance, a lady's purse that you might be able to find at Walmart for 38 bucks, but you build and produce a purse made out of an alligator hide, it can easily retail for as much as $3,000 or more. A man's bifold wallet, $300, $500 or more. All these other products that can be made from alligator hide, and the market is constantly changing in different ways to market using alligator hides. And so when you get back to the late 1800s and the value of that hide, that's where this came from. And so the alligator was hunted to near endangered status and actually put on the endangered species list in 1967. Now, the uncontrolled harvest prior to being put on the endangered species list continued through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And we have this photograph. This is an original photograph of a gentleman from Warren County that had a picture of his dad who had returned back from World War II and was going out with his friends just south of Warren County. But it's an original photograph depicting how people, even up to the 1967, were utilizing alligators, and there were no regulations to protect them. That, with the endangered species list listing, began a process with many state wildlife agencies to start restoration projects. Mississippi was one of those areas. Mississippi was able to acquire about 3,000 or more alligators from the Louisiana Department of Wildlife. And those alligators were captured at a place called Rockefeller Refuge, which is in the extreme southwest portion of Louisiana, near the Texas border, where there has been decades of alligator research. Now, even though the alligator was on the endangered species list, they still existed in high numbers in some parts of the country, Louisiana and Florida being one of those, but as far as the entire range, they were in danger. So Louisiana was able to donate some live alligators to Mississippi. They also provided some to the state of Arkansas. And our game wardens, conservation officers, biologists traveled to Rockefeller Refuge on a number of trips in the early and mid-1970s and brought these alligators back to the state of Mississippi. They were released into suitable habitats in an effort to try and restore the alligator population back to its original state. And not that it actually worked, but there was a thought at the time that the introduction of alligators would actually help with what had become a nuisance situation with beaver populations in the state of Mississippi at that time. There was actually a time back in the 1930s and 40s that beaver were brought into the state to foster the fur trade. And that restoration project worked very well. As you can see across the state, there are beaver everywhere. They exist in nuisance conditions. And so the thought was, if you needed some alligators to help you control beaver populations on your property, if you made a request, then the department would bring those alligators, or you could come and pick them up actually in a croaker sack. There was a location at the Jackson Fairgrounds where you could actually come and pick them up. And we have some photographs of those as that actually took place in the 1970s. Truth is, some research done at Mississippi State University also in the late 1970s showed that alligators are not good controllers of beaver populations. They will consume them as prey. But if you've spent much time out in the wild, you know that where you see alligators, you usually see beaver, and vice versa. They will prey upon them, but as far as controlling them, they don't actually control the numbers. The research actually showed that alligators learn from conditioned learning that if they attack an adult beaver and don't properly grab the beaver, that he will actually bite the alligator, and it results in a response that's negative to the alligator. And so we believe that alligators learn over time to select younger beaver as their prey.